A little girl believed nights were for dreams and stories, until the nightmare started behind closed doors. Her beloved grandfather, the town's kind hardware store owner, hid a secret so dark it shattered her childhood forever. Decades later, when she thought the past was buried, his shadow returned, threatening the safety of the family once more. What happened next changed everything. Watch until the end to uncover the truth she fought so hard to reveal. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. She was only 6 when the nightmare began. The quiet town of Fairhaven, Massachusetts, where the seasons turned soft and familiar, was the kind of place where children fell asleep, dreaming of stories told by their grandparents. Nighttime was supposed to be a sanctuary, a time when the world outside hushed itself to a gentle lull. But for her, those nights held a secret terror that no one else could see. The Whitman house on Elm Street was a tall, weathered Victorian, with white peeling paint and creaking porches. It was the kind of house that looked full of life by day, with laughter spilling out its windows. By night, though, the silence there was broken only by the faint ticking of an old clock and the soft footsteps of a man who hid behind the mask of kindness. Mr. Whitman was known in town as the gentle, hard-working owner of the local hardware store. To his neighbors, he was the grandpa who baked cookies for the children, the man who lifted his grandchildren onto his lap and smiled for every birthday photo. But when the house grew dark and the world around them seemed safe, his true face showed. A face no one dared speak of. She didn't understand it at first. The cookies he brought tasted sweet and warm, and his voice was soft when he called her his special little girl. But the nights grew darker than the skies outside. When the rest of the house was wrapped in sleep, he would quietly open the door to the room where she and her siblings slept. At first, it was whispers and strange touches that made her heart pound with fear she didn't know how to name. His eyes were cold and empty, a shadow where warmth should have been. He warned her in a voice so low it was almost a breath. If you tell, terrible things will happen. Your family will fall apart. She learned silence fast. Years passed. The secret grew heavy in her chest, a weight she carried alone. She learned to smile for family photos even as her insides twisted in pain. At school, she was quiet, withdrawn, afraid of what would happen if anyone got too close. At home, she avoided the dark corners and whispered prayers to God, begging for a way out of the nightmare. Her parents saw nothing. Her siblings knew nothing. The house carried its secrets like a dark stain on the wood floors. When she turned 18, she left. She thought distance would heal the wounds, that the past would stay buried beneath new memories, new love, and new life. She married, had children, and built walls around herself so thick no one could break through. But some nightmares don't stay in the past. Decades later, now a grandmother, she found herself back in the quiet streets of Massachusetts. This time, in a small suburban home in Ashland, where her daughter lived with her own little girl. A girl as innocent and trusting as she had been once. That night, the old fear crept back. She was lying awake when she heard footsteps outside, her granddaughter's bedroom door. The house was still, the clock ticking louder than ever. Her heart raced, every muscle tense. When she opened the door, there he was, Mr. Whitman, his hair now white and thin, his eyes still the same cold emptiness she remembered. "I'm just checking on the little girl," he said, a smile that didn't reach his eyes curling on his lips. But she saw the truth. Her voice cracked as she shouted, demanding he leave. Her family woke, confusion and shock clouding their faces. When she revealed what she had hidden all these years, disbelief met her words. Her mother wept and called her a liar. her siblings turned away. To them, Mr. Whitman was a saint, a man incapable of harm. But she did not falter. She fought to keep him away, to protect the little girl who was now her granddaughter. The cost was high. She was rejected, accused of destroying a man's good name. Yet for the first time in decades, she felt the heavy chains of silence begin to break. Behind closed doors, she found a few who believed her, who held her hand through the storm. Slowly, more stories surfaced. She was not alone. But the night was far from over. That night, after the confrontation, as the house finally fell silent again, she knew this was only the beginning. The nightmare had followed her home, and the true battle to protect her family was just beginning. The heavy weight in her chest was no longer just fear. It was a quiet, burning hope. The days after that night were the hardest she had ever faced. The weight of what she had revealed pressed down on her chest like an iron band, tighter with each passing hour. She could feel the coldness of rejection wrap itself around her like a second skin. Her mother's tears, not of comfort but of accusation. Her siblings' silence, a wall she could not climb. Even the people she had hoped would understand turned away, unwilling to disturb the peace they had always known. Yet inside her, a fierce flame began to burn. For so many years, fear had been her cage, shame her silent companion. Now, with every cold shoulder and doubtful glance, that flame grew brighter. She was no longer a frightened child hiding in the shadows. She was a grandmother, a guardian, and she would not let the past repeat itself. She spent restless nights pacing the quiet rooms of her daughter's house, staring out the window at the thick trees lining the street, their leaves whispering secrets to the wind. The faces of her own childhood swam before her eyes, the wide eyes of her siblings sleeping safely, the smile of her mother, the gentle embrace of her father, all unaware of the darkness that had crept in under their very roof. She thought back to the early days, to the time before the nightmare began, a time when the world was still innocent, and laughter filled the air like sunlight. The Whitman family had always been close, known for their kindness and hard work. Her grandfather was the heart of it all, a man whose hands built and mended, whose voice told stories by the fireside. Everyone trusted him, and that trust was the cruelest betrayal. She remembered the first cookie he brought her, a small, carefully wrapped biscuit with chocolate chips. She had smiled, feeling special, chosen. That was when the darkness started to seep into her life, quietly, almost invisibly. The games began soon after, whispered commands and touches that froze her blood. But no one could see what she endured behind closed doors. Years passed, and she grew into a young woman who learned to hide pain behind a mask of normalcy. School was a refuge, but even there, the scars of her secret followed her like a shadow. She dared not speak, fearing the threat whispered in the dark. If she told, the family would fall apart. So she kept the silence, and the silence became her prison. Now, decades later, the nightmare had returned, not as a distant memory, but as a living threat standing at her granddaughter's door. Her daughter was shaken but confused. How could this man, her beloved grandfather, be capable of such darkness? To her, he was simply family, old, frail, a remnant of a gentler time. But she saw the truth, clear and unyielding in his eyes. The confrontation tore at the fragile threads holding the family together. Her daughter's husband was torn between disbelief and fear. Her granddaughter, too young to understand, clung to her mother, sensing the tension in the air like a storm. Before it breaks, she tried to explain, to tell them everything she had buried deep inside. But the words felt fragile, as if the slightest touch would shatter them into 1,000 pieces. Her mother's sobs echoed through the walls, but they were not tears of understanding. They were tears of denial, grief twisted into anger. Her sibling's silence was the loudest blow. The very people who should have been her allies turned away, protecting the image of the man they had loved all their lives. To them he was a saint. To her he was a nightmare. In the days that followed, she found herself isolated. Friends who had once offered comfort now kept their distance, afraid of the scandal. Neighbors whispered behind closed doors. The town that had once embraced the Whitman family with open arms now looked away, but she did not waver. The protection of her granddaughter was the only thing that mattered. She knew she had to act, no matter the cost. She sought out help quietly, reaching out to a small group of women who had lived through their own silent battles. Their stories echoed hers, whispers of pain hidden beneath smiles, wounds disguised by time. They understood, and their support became a lifeline. Together they began to unravel the web of silence that had protected her grandfather for so long. Slowly, carefully, more stories emerged from the shadows. Other children who had once played in the Whitman home spoke in hushed tones of fear and confusion. The threads of truth began to weave a tapestry too vast to ignore. Her fight for justice was slow and exhausting. The town resisted, clinging to the image of Mr. Whitman as a beloved elder. Investigations were met with skepticism. People questioned motives, whispered of lies and grudges. But she pressed on, fueled by the memory of the little girl she had once been. The child who had suffered in silence for too long. Her relationship with her family became strained, fragile as glass. Visits were cut short, phone calls unanswered. Yet beneath the surface, a quiet strength took root. Her granddaughter, safe and unaware of the battle raging around her, became her reason to endure. Each smile, each innocent laugh, was a beacon of hope in the darkest of nights. Late one evening, as she sat by the window watching the stars blink into existence, she felt the weight of the years settle on her shoulders. The journey was far from over, and the scars ran deep. But for the first time in a long time, she dared to hope. Hope that the silence would finally be broken. Hope that the past would not repeat itself. Hope that the little girl inside her, the one who had lived through so much pain, could one day be free. And in that moment, as the night whispered secrets only the stars could hear, she made a silent vow. She would not rest until every shadow was brought into the light. But even as she vowed to fight, a new fear crept into her heart. One that whispered of secrets still buried, of dangers yet unseen. The nightmare was not yet over. The following weeks unraveled like a slow, merciless storm. Each day brought new challenges, fresh wounds reopening as memories long buried clawed their way to the surface. The house where she once sought comfort had become a battlefield. Oh, not of swords or guns, but of whispered accusations and heavy silences. Her daughter struggled to reconcile the man she had known with the shadow she now faced. The confusion was palpable, twisting her voice and shaking her hands whenever she tried to speak. The denial wasn't just in her mother or siblings anymore. It had rooted itself deeply within her daughter's heart, where love and loyalty wrestled fiercely with fear and disbelief. Despite the strain, she refused to back down. The pain was immense, a relentless tide that threatened to drown her. But so was the urgency. If she failed, the little girl sleeping peacefully down the hall could become the next victim of the darkness she had narrowly escaped. The legal process was agonizingly slow. Authorities moved cautiously, reluctant to reopen wounds in a town, clinging to its comforting narratives. Statements were taken, memories questioned. But the past was a fragile thing, distorted by time and fear. She sat through meetings that seemed endless, each one forcing her to recount moments she wished could be erased. The taste of bitterness lingered in her mouth, a reminder that truth often comes wrapped in pain. Friends faded away, some out of discomfort, others because they could not bear to face the ugly reality now exposed. Her mother's refusal to accept what she said fractured the family further. Once close, their relationship became strained and distant. The woman who had rocked her to sleep as a child now turned her back with tears that carried accusation rather than comfort. Siblings whispered behind closed doors, unwilling to confront the brokenness that had seeped into their shared past. The Whitman name, once a symbol of kindness and stability, now hung heavy with suspicion and sorrow. Through it all, she found refuge in small, unexpected places. Late nights spent talking with women who had their own stories of pain and survival. Quiet moments holding her granddaughter close, feeling the steady beat of innocence against her chest. These became her anchors amid the storm. The memory of the first time her grandfather crossed the threshold of her childhood bedroom came back with vivid clarity. The gentle voice that had turned sinister, the threats whispered under the veil of night. She understood now how deeply those moments had shaped her, molding her into a woman guarded and cautious. Her own children, once far away in their busy lives, returned slowly to her side. They saw the toll the battle had taken, the weariness etched into every line on her face. Their support was fragile but growing, a thread of hope weaving through the darkness. One afternoon, as she walked the quiet streets of Ashland, she passed the old hardware store her grandfather once owned. The windows were dusty, the sign faded. Inside, the memories echoed. Laughter, hard work, the facade that had concealed so much pain. She wondered how many others had suffered in silence, hidden beneath the veneer of everyday life. How many secrets had been kept to protect a reputation? The realization was both heartbreaking and galvanizing. She began to write down her story, not as a diary, but as a testament. Each word a piece of the truth she longed to set free. It was a way to claim her voice, to give life to the pain that had shaped her, and to the courage that now fueled her fight. Her granddaughter's safety was her constant thought. She installed locks, talked about boundaries, taught her to trust her instincts. The innocence she once held so dear had been tarnished, but in this child she found a new purpose, a chance to protect what she had lost. The nights were often the hardest. Shadows seemed to gather in corners, memories creeping in when she tried to rest. Yet even in those darkest hours, she clung to the promise she had made, to never let silence win. More stories began to surface quietly. A neighbor here, a distant relative there, whispers of discomfort, of moments unspoken. Each revelation was a step toward breaking the chain of silence that had bound the family for generations. She reached out to a counselor, a soft-spoken woman who listened without judgment. Those sessions became a lifeline, a space where she could unravel the knots of pain and fear that had tightened around her heart. Her daughter, too, attended with her, slowly beginning to see the fractures beneath the polished surface of their family history. It was painful, a slow dismantling of illusions, but necessary. One evening, a letter arrived, unsigned and folded with care. Inside was a brief message. "You are not alone." It was a small gesture, but it sent ripples through her soul. Someone else knew. Someone else had lived through this, too. The journey was far from over. The court dates loomed ahead, each one a mountain she would have to climb. The town's whispers grew louder, some venomous, others sympathetic but distant. Her name was spoken in hushed tones. Her bravery met with both admiration and scorn. Her granddaughter asked questions she wasn't ready to answer, her innocent eyes wide with curiosity and confusion. She held her close, promising protection, even as her own heart trembled. There were nights when despair threatened to overwhelm her, when the loneliness felt unbearable. But each morning she woke with the same resolve: to keep fighting, to keep speaking, to keep loving fiercely. She began to notice small changes in those around her. A neighbor offering a quiet smile, a friend returning a call, her children standing a little closer. Slowly the isolation began to crack, and the light of understanding seeped in. In the deepest moments of struggle, she remembered the little girl she once was. Frightened, alone, but unbroken. That memory became a shield, a reminder that survival was possible, and that the darkness, no matter how thick, could be overcome. The story she was living was painful and messy, filled with heartbreak and fear. But it was also a story of resilience, of courage, of love that refused to be silenced. The night she faced her grandfather at the door had been just the beginning. What came after was a journey through shadows and light, a test of strength that would shape the rest of her life. And though the road ahead was uncertain, she walked it with determination. Because some battles are fought not for glory or revenge, but for the chance to protect the innocent and to heal the wounds that time alone cannot mend. The days blurred into each other as the weight of the past pressed relentlessly upon her shoulders. Every morning felt like a climb up a steep, crumbling hill, the kind that threatened to give way beneath her at any moment. The battle she fought was not only against the shadows that haunted her memories, but also against the walls others built around their disbelief. Her granddaughter's laughter, once a balm to her weary soul, sometimes felt like a fragile thread stretched too thin. She treasured those moments dearly, yet beneath the smiles lurked a tension she could never fully shake. The safety she craved, for that child seemed always just out of reach. At family gatherings, the air was thick with unspoken words and sideways glances. Her presence stirred a mixture of sympathy, suspicion, and resentment. Some relatives avoided her outright, their conversations halting as she approached. Others offered hollow reassurances, their eyes betraying doubt. Her own siblings remained distant. Their refusal to accept the truth left wounds that no apology could heal. They clung to the memory of their father, the kind man who had taught them to fish, who had built their childhood homes with steady hands, and rejected the dark chapters she brought to light. The town of Ashland, quiet and picturesque, bore witness to her struggle in subtle ways. Familiar faces greeted her with guarded politeness, and whispers followed her footsteps like shadows. Yet among the crowd, a few brave souls offered silent support, small acts of kindness that rekindled her flickering hope. She found solace in the routine of daily life, mornings spent tending the garden, afternoons helping her daughter prepare meals, evenings reading stories to her granddaughter. These simple acts grounded her, reminding her that life continued despite the turmoil. The legal battle dragged on, each hearing a draining reminder of the cost of speaking out. Evidence was scarce, memories fragile, and the burden of proof heavy. But her resolve never wavered. This was about more than justice. It was about breaking a cycle of silence that had spanned generations. During one particularly difficult session, her daughter's eyes filled with tears as she listened to the painful details unfolding once again. The burden of disbelief weighed heavily on her shoulders, but slowly, cracks appeared in her armor of denial. The love for her mother began to pierce through the fog of confusion. Late nights became a time of reflection and quiet tears. She often sat by the window staring at the stars, searching for strength in the vastness of the sky. The memories that haunted her seemed smaller under the endless expanse, and for a moment, she felt less alone. Her granddaughter, sensing the tension but too young to understand its depth, clung to her with innocent trust. She whispered promises of protection and love, vowing silently to shield her from the darkness that had touched their family. A breakthrough came unexpectedly. A distant cousin, long estranged from the family, reached out with a trembling voice and a confession. She too had suffered in silence, afraid to speak against a man who had once been a pillar of their community. Their shared pain forged a new bond, a lifeline amid the storm. Together they began to gather more stories, more voices that had been silenced by fear and shame. The truth, once buried beneath layers of denial, started to emerge with a quiet but unstoppable force. Each revelation chipped away at the carefully constructed facade. Despite the growing support, the cost was steep. The woman's health began to falter under the strain. Sleepless nights and constant worry took their toll. Her hands, once steady and strong, trembled with exhaustion. Yet she pressed on, fueled by a fierce determination to protect those she loved. The confrontations at home grew more intense. Her mother's tears turned to anger, her words sharp and unforgiving. The family dinners she once cherished became battlegrounds, where old wounds were torn open and fresh scars formed. The divide between past and present widened with every bitter exchange. Her daughter, torn between loyalty and disbelief, struggled to find peace. The love that bound them was tested in ways neither could have imagined. Yet in the quiet moments, they found glimmers of understanding, fragile but real. One evening, as winter deepened outside, she found herself alone in the old family home. The silence was oppressive, filled with echoes of memories too painful to face. She traced her fingers over the worn wallpaper, recalling the nights of fear and confusion, the whispered threats that had shaped her childhood. A single photograph caught her eye, a family portrait from decades ago, smiling faces frozen in time. Among them, her grandfather's eyes held a kindness that now felt like a cruel mask. The contrast between that image and the man she knew stirred a storm of emotions within her. That night, she dreamed of the past, the small hands that once reached out to hers, the promises of safety that had been broken. But amid the shadows, a faint light flickered, a reminder that even in the darkest places, hope could survive. Her resolve hardened. She would not let the silence continue. For herself, for her daughter, for her granddaughter. She would fight until her voice was heard and her family was safe. The following days brought new challenges, threats veiled in concern, whispers disguised as advice. The community's judgment weighed heavily, but so did the quiet strength of those who stood with her. Her granddaughter's birthday approached, a day she had once feared to celebrate. But this year she vowed to make it a day of light, a celebration of survival and love. Invitations were sent, decorations bought, and a small cake baked with trembling hands. As the party day arrived, the house filled with laughter and warmth. Friends and family gathered, tentative but hopeful. The little girl's eyes sparkled with joy, unaware of the battles fought to keep her safe. Amid the celebration, a sudden knock at the door sent a ripple through the room. The moment froze. A heartbeat stretched thin with tension and fear. Who could it be? The past was never far, and the shadows lingered still. She opened the door, slowly, heart pounding. Standing there was a woman she barely recognized, a face marked by pain and resilience. She stepped inside, carrying a folder thick with letters, photographs, and testimonies. This stranger was another piece of the puzzle, a witness who had been silent for years but now spoke, with a voice steady and clear. Her presence brought both relief and renewed fear. The fight was far from over. As the sun set outside, the house buzzed with whispered conversations and guarded glances. The truth was unraveling, thread by fragile thread, and though the path ahead was uncertain and fraught with hardship, she felt a spark of hope ignite within her chest. In that moment, surrounded by love and pain, she understood something profound. The journey through suffering was not a solitary one. It was shared by many, woven through lives touched by fear, silence, and courage. The night closed in, carrying with it both the weight of the past and the promise of a future still to be written. The arrival of the woman with the folder marked a turning point neither she nor her family had expected. The fragile equilibrium they clung to, however precarious, shifted in an instant, revealing layers of pain and betrayal they had only begun to understand. The folder, thick with papers, held stories that echoed her own. Stories whispered in shadows, hidden behind polite smiles and the town's facade of normalcy. For hours that night, the living room became a sanctuary of shared grief and quiet revelations. The woman's voice, steady but heavy with years of silence, filled the space as she unfolded her tale. Her story intertwined with the threads of the family's past in ways that sent tremors through the fragile trust they once held. They learned of stolen childhoods, broken promises, and the impossible burden of carrying secrets too heavy for one person alone. The woman spoke of nights filled with fear, the suffocating weight of silence, and the courage it took to finally break free. Each word was a wound reopened, but also a step toward healing. In the flickering candlelight, the granddaughter listened wide-eyed, too young to grasp the full depth, but old enough to sense the seriousness in the voices around her. She clung to her grandmother's hand, her small fingers a lifeline in the storm of emotions. The family, fractured and fragile, began to pull together in a way they hadn't before. Walls of doubt crumbled, replaced by a tentative understanding. The mother's tears no longer held anger alone. They carried the sorrow of realizing how much had been hidden, how much pain had been endured in silence. With this new ally, the fight took on a clearer shape. The folder was more than evidence. It was a symbol of solidarity, a testament that she was not alone. Together they mapped out a path forward, navigating the labyrinth of emotions and the slow march toward justice. The weeks that followed were a blur of meetings, calls, and careful planning. They sought legal advice, reached out to support groups, and forged connections with others who had walked similar paths. Each small victory brought hope. Each setback tested their resolve. Amid the chaos, the woman found strength in the little moments. The warmth of her granddaughter's hug, the shared laughter over a simple meal, the quiet understanding in her daughter's eyes. These fragments of normalcy grounded her, reminding her of the life she was fighting to protect. But the road was anything but smooth. The family's name, once a source of pride, became a target of gossip and suspicion. Friends disappeared, doors closed, and invitations stopped arriving. The community they had known seemed to turn its back, choosing comfort in silence over confronting painful truths. The woman's health waned under the pressure. Sleepless nights became frequent as she wrestled with the memories and the demands of the present. The weight of responsibility was a constant companion, threatening to crush her spirit. Yet amidst the darkness, moments of light pierced through. Small victories, like a heartfelt apology from a distant relative, or a letter of support from a stranger who had faced similar pain, rekindled her determination. She clung to these sparks, nurturing them like fragile flames in the cold. One afternoon, as the first snow of the season fell gently outside, she received a call that brought both hope and anxiety. A local newspaper had decided to feature her story, breaking the silence that had long shielded the town's darkest secret. The journalist was compassionate, careful to honor the pain while shedding light on the resilience. The article was published quietly but made waves. Letters arrived, some filled with encouragement, others with doubt and anger. The community's reaction was mixed, reflecting the complex emotions stirred by confronting a painful truth long buried. Her family rallied around her, their bonds strengthened by the shared struggle. Together they faced the whispers and the stares, finding courage in their unity. The granddaughter, too young to understand fully, sensed the change. The shift from fear to empowerment. The woman's nights remained restless, haunted by memories and fears for the future. But the growing chorus of voices speaking out against silence gave her hope that the cycle could finally be broken. She found solace in the knowledge that her story might prevent others from suffering in silence. Amid these turbulent days, she began keeping a small journal, not a diary filled with secrets, but a record of moments that mattered, a smile shared, a hand held, a step forward in the long journey. It became a testament to survival, a reminder that even in suffering, life endured. One evening, as she sat by the fire with her daughter and granddaughter, the conversation turned to dreams and hopes. The little girl's eyes sparkled with innocence and possibility, a beacon of light in the room. Her laughter filled the space, chasing away shadows that lingered too long. In that moment, the woman felt a quiet peace settle over her. The battle was far from over, but the path was clearer. The nightmare of her past, once a prison, was now a story of courage and hope. The following day brought another challenge. A letter arrived from an old friend of her grandfather, a man respected in the community, who insisted on speaking with her. His words were cautious but hinted at truths she had not yet uncovered. Their meeting was tense, filled with careful words and unspoken fears. The man shared memories of her grandfather that painted a more complex picture. A man torn between love and darkness, guilt and denial. It was a reminder that people are rarely just good or bad, but a tangled mix of both. This new insight deepened her understanding but also brought fresh pain. The man's hesitations mirrored the family's earlier doubts, underscoring the difficulty of facing uncomfortable truths. Yet his willingness to speak was a step toward reconciliation. As winter gave way to spring, the community began to shift. Conversations started in hushed tones, then grew louder and more open. Support groups formed, and awareness campaigns spread. The silence that had protected abusers was breaking, replaced by a growing call for accountability and healing. The woman found herself invited to speak at gatherings, her voice steady despite the tremors in her heart. She shared her story not for pity, but to offer strength to others. Each time she spoke, the burden lightened slightly, replaced by a fierce hope for the future. Her family, once fractured, grew stronger. The daughter and granddaughter flourished in the light of new understanding. Old wounds began to heal, though scars remained as reminders of what had been endured. One spring morning she stood in the garden, watching her granddaughter chase butterflies among the flowers. The sight filled her with a profound sense of peace. The past had left its mark, but it no longer controlled her. She knew the journey was far from over. The shadows of the past still lingered, but now they were tempered by light. The nightmare that had haunted her childhood had transformed into a story of survival, courage, and ultimately, hope. With the coming of each new day, she embraced the future, not as a prisoner of her past, but as a woman who had reclaimed her life. The fight had been long and painful, but it had forged a strength that no darkness could extinguish. The granddaughter's laughter echoed through the house, a promise that life, despite its hardships, was worth every struggle. The family had found a new beginning, built on truth and love, ready to face whatever came next. And so, amid the blooming flowers and warming sun, the woman's story moved forward, a testament to the power of courage, the resilience of the human spirit, and the unbreakable bonds of family. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over the family was quickly tested as the days grew longer and the weight of unspoken truths pressed heavier on their hearts. The woman, now a pillar of quiet strength, found herself caught between the relentless pull of the past and the tentative hope of the future. Each morning brought with it a new challenge, a fresh wave of memories, moments of doubt, and the ever-present shadow of her grandfather's legacy. Her granddaughter, with her bright eyes and infectious laughter, remained the heart of the family's renewed spirit. Yet, even her innocence could not shield the family entirely from the tremors that still shook their foundation. The little girl's questions, though simple and genuine, pierced through the carefully constructed walls of silence like arrows, forcing conversations that none felt ready to have. One evening, as twilight draped the small town of Ashland in a soft purple haze, the woman sat by the kitchen window, watching the stars emerge one by one. Her fingers trembled slightly as she clutched a faded photograph of her grandfather. His face smiling back at her, both kind and unknowable. The contrast between the man in the picture and the darkness she had endured was a gulf she struggled to bridge. Her daughter entered quietly, carrying a tray of tea. They shared a look filled with 1,000 unspoken words. The years of mistrust and pain lingered like a fog, but beneath it all was a fragile thread of hope, weaving them together again. As they sipped their tea, the conversation turned to the coming weeks, the meetings with counselors, the small gatherings with other families, the community efforts to raise awareness. It was a slow, difficult path toward healing, marked by setbacks and small victories. The woman's health, worn thin by years of struggle, began to show signs of fatigue. Her spirit remained unbroken, but the body's limits were clear. Sleepless nights, haunted by memories, and the relentless fight for justice took their toll. Yet she refused to relent, driven by the fierce love for her family and the desire to protect her granddaughter from the shadows of the past. One afternoon, a letter arrived that shook the foundations of their fragile peace. It was from a distant cousin, someone the woman had not seen since childhood, who now reached out with a mix of apology and revelation. The letter spoke of memories, long buried and secrets kept in silence, revealing that the darkness of their grandfather's actions was far wider than she had imagined. The words cut deep, stirring a storm of emotions. Anger, sorrow, and a desperate need for answers. The woman read and reread the letter, each line a thread unraveling a tapestry of pain that had been woven across generations. It became clear that the journey toward healing was far from over. The family's story was more tangled and complex than she had believed. Determined to confront the past fully, the woman reached out to the cousin. Their meeting was cautious, filled with tentative trust and shared sorrow. Together they began piecing together memories and fragments of truth, uncovering a history of silence that had allowed suffering to flourish in the shadows. The cousin's stories echoed her own, nights filled with fear, the pressure to stay silent, and the crushing weight of shame. Their bond, forged in pain, became a source of strength, reminding them that they were not alone in their struggle. Back home, the family grappled with the new revelations. The mother struggled with feelings of betrayal and guilt, questioning what she had missed and how she might have failed. The granddaughter, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it, sought comfort in the familiar warmth of her grandmother's embrace. The woman found herself navigating a delicate balance, protecting her family while confronting the painful truths that threatened to tear them apart. Her resolve was tested daily, but her determination never wavered. She knew that only through facing the darkness could they hope to find light. Community support continued to grow, but so did the challenges. Some neighbors withdrew, uncomfortable with the uncomfortable truths being exposed. Rumors circulated, fueled by fear and misunderstanding. The woman faced moments of isolation, Yet she remained steadfast, buoyed by the knowledge that her fight was for something greater than herself. One evening, as spring rain pattered softly against the windows, the woman received a call that brought a mixture of relief and new uncertainty. A counselor who had been working with other families affected by similar trauma invited her to participate in a local support network. The group offered a space for sharing, healing, and mutual support, a lifeline in the often lonely journey toward recovery. She hesitated briefly, the weight of years of silence heavy on her shoulders, but then agreed. The first meeting was both daunting and cathartic. Listening to others' stories, feeling the solidarity of shared pain, the woman found a new sense of belonging and hope. It was a reminder that healing was possible, even in the face of profound suffering. As the weeks passed, the family began to rebuild itself in small, meaningful ways. The daughter found moments of peace in her work and her role as a mother. The granddaughter blossomed, her laughter and curiosity a balm for weary hearts. The woman, though still carrying the scars of the past, embraced each day with quiet courage. Yet beneath the surface, the memories lingered. There were nights when the past surged back with unbearable intensity, flashbacks of fear and helplessness that threatened to engulf her. In those moments, she clung to the love of her family and the strength she had found in breaking the silence. One particular night, as she lay awake listening to the steady breathing of her granddaughter in the next room, a wave of fear washed over her. She remembered the countless nights she had spent terrified, waiting for the nightmare to begin again. But this time she was ready. She was no longer the frightened child. She was a woman who had survived and who would protect the innocent with every ounce of her strength. The days grew warmer, and with the coming of summer, new possibilities emerged. The family began to spend more time outdoors, savoring the simple joys of sunshine and fresh air. The woman found solace in the garden, tending to flowers that seemed to bloom brighter each day, a symbol of resilience and hope. Despite the ongoing challenges, there were moments of laughter and light. Family dinners became a sacred space where stories were shared, bonds were strengthened, and the weight of the past was eased, if only for a little while. One afternoon, as she watched her granddaughter run freely through the yard, the woman felt a profound sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and painful, but it had brought them to a place of healing and hope. The nightmare was no longer a shadow that controlled them, but a chapter in a story of survival and love. The woman knew that the path ahead would still hold obstacles, but she was ready. With her family by her side and a community beginning to stand with them, she faced the future with quiet strength. In the soft glow of the setting sun, she whispered a promise to herself, to her granddaughter, and to all the silent children whose voices had yet to be heard. The past would no longer define them. They would rise, stronger and united, carrying the light of hope into every new day. The days that followed the confrontation at Ashland were filled with a storm of emotions: anger, denial, sorrow, and an overwhelming sense of isolation. She had expected resistance, but the depth of the disbelief from her own family still struck her like a blow. Her mother's tears and accusations, her siblings' cold silence, the friends who turned away. It was a loneliness she had never imagined facing, yet, beneath the pain, a fierce determination began to grow. She knew that silence had allowed the nightmare to live on for too long. Every morning she woke to memories that clung like shadows: the smell of the old Victorian house, the sound of creaking floorboards at night, the cold touch of fear that had haunted her childhood. But now, those memories were no longer just wounds to hide. They became the fire that fueled her fight for truth, not only for herself but for the countless others still trapped in silence. She sought help quietly at first, finding strength in support groups where whispered stories of survival wove a fragile but unbreakable bond. Among these women, the same names, the same places, the same faces appeared. Victims of a man revered by the town, a man whose kindness masked a darkness that had poisoned so many lives. The fight to keep him away from her granddaughter was a battle fought in small moments. A careful watching over every visit, a tightening of boundaries met with his persistent charm and veiled threats. He was no longer the strong figure of her childhood memories. Age had slowed his body, but not the cold calculation in his eyes. She refused to let fear rule her family again. Her daughter, torn between loyalty to her father and the dawning realization of the truth, struggled silently. The tension between mother and daughter was a fragile thread, stretched thin, but never broken. The woman's heart ached with the knowledge that her revelation had shaken the foundation of a family built on lies and denial. But she also knew that breaking the silence was the only path to healing. Local authorities began to take notice as more women stepped forward, their voices growing louder and their stories too similar to ignore. The investigation was slow, painstaking, a painful reopening of wounds for many. Yet, with each testimony, the facade of the beloved Mr. Whitman began to crumble, revealing the bitter reality beneath. The community was divided. Some clung desperately to the image of the man they thought they knew. Others struggled to accept the horror in their midst. The woman found herself at the center of this storm, vilified by some, supported by others. But through it all, her resolve never wavered. She spent long nights writing letters, attending meetings, and comforting those who trembled in the shadow of their past. Her story became a beacon, a painful but necessary light in the darkness, and though the road ahead was uncertain, she embraced it with the courage born from years of suffering and silence. One evening, as she sat by the window watching the rain fall softly against the glass, she realized that this journey was more than a fight against a man. It was a fight for truth, for justice, and for the power to reclaim their lives. It was the quiet, unyielding strength of a survivor who refused to be broken. The battle was far from over, and the scars ran deep. But for the first time in decades, she felt the stirrings of hope. A fragile promise that even the darkest nights could give way to dawn. Morning light spilled gently through the curtains, casting a soft glow over the quiet room. For the first time in a long while, she woke feeling a flicker of peace. Fragile, yet undeniable. The heaviness that had settled in her chest was still there, but it no longer consumed her. The past, with all its shadows, was not erased, but somehow it seemed less suffocating. There was a sense that despite the pain and rejection, a new chapter was beginning. The house, once thick with silence and secrets, now felt alive with small moments of tenderness. Her granddaughter's laughter floated down the hallway, light and unburdened. She watched her from the doorway, the way the child's eyes sparkled with innocence and hope. And for a moment, she allowed herself to breathe without the weight of fear pressing down. Preparing breakfast, she reflected on the network of support she had found. Women who shared her story, who bore their own scars, but stood united. Together they had formed an unbreakable bond, a sanctuary where the unspeakable could be spoken, and where healing could begin. These women were warriors of truth, their voices a chorus that challenged the silence and stigma that had long held them captive. The meetings had become lifelines, spaces filled with shared tears, quiet nods of understanding, and the courage to face what others refused to see. In these rooms, she was not the broken girl from Elm Street. She was a survivor, a voice that could no longer be silenced. Each story told was a brick laid in the foundation of a new future, a future where fear no longer dictated the terms of their lives. That afternoon, her daughter came to visit. Their conversations were still cautious, fragile threads woven from pain and love. The wounds between them had not yet fully healed, but the walls of denial were beginning to crack. For the first time, the daughter listened not with disbelief, but with a quiet sorrow and an open heart. The journey toward reconciliation was slow, marked by moments of tension and tenderness. She also reached out to other family members, attempting to bridge the divides that had splintered their relationships. Some doors remained firmly shut, others opened just a crack, offering hope that even the deepest fractures could be mended with time and understanding. Meanwhile, the town itself was changing. Conversations once whispered in fear now surfaced in daylight, revealing the painful truth beneath the veneer of respectability. More women came forward, their courage inspired by the ripple of voices that refused to be silenced. The investigation into Mr. Whitman's past continued, a painstaking process that uncovered long-buried secrets and brought overdue justice. The community's response was mixed. Some clung to the comforting myth of the kindly old man, while others faced the grim reality with painful acceptance. In the midst of this, she stood firm, a pillar of strength for those who still trembled. In the shadows, her life, once defined by silence and fear, was now a testament to resilience. She spent her days advocating for change, comforting survivors, and nurturing the fragile hope that had begun to take root. Her story had become a beacon, not just of suffering, but of survival and the possibility of new beginnings. One quiet evening, as she sat watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of gold and pink, she felt a deep sense of closure. The nightmare that had haunted her childhood no longer held power over her. The truth had set her free, and in that freedom she found the strength to forgive. Not to forget, but to reclaim her life from the darkness. Her journey was far from easy, and the scars would always remain. But in the warmth of the fading light, she saw a future shaped not by fear, but by courage and love. The story that began in silence was ending in hope.